One of the main reasons I play video games is for the story. But it's not just the reason I play games now, it's also why I started playing them in the first place. As a kid, The Legend of Zelda was my very favorite series, even though I'd never beaten a single Zelda game at the time. In fact, I'd never even played a Zelda game. But I had watched my brothers play them. Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64 was the first game I ever remember seeing my brothers play, and it had everything.
Fencing, fighting, torture, revenge, giants, monsters, chases, escapes, true love, miracles.
Doesn't sound too bad.
In a time when I could barely read, I remember being fascinated by the world of Ocarina of Time, and that fascination drove me to want to play games as well. Today, more than 20 years after the release of Ocarina of Time, most of my favorite stories come from video games. Games like Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, Custom Robo, and Fire Emblem have left a huge impact on how I view storytelling, and have stuck with me better than any book or movie ever has. These days, video game stories come in almost every genre, but there was a time when just getting the simplest of games running at all was a challenge for developers. So how did we get here? In the early days of gaming, according to Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, it was exhausting to get games to play without worrying about story. Games like Pong in 1972 were already pushing the technical limits of video games. Even things like theming were somewhat of a luxury in those days. Some games like Computer Space had enough theming for you to have an idea what was going on, but there wasn't much beyond that. Why were you shooting down the other ships? Were they aliens? Space pirates? Who knows? At least in games like 1975 Gunfight, you had a pretty good idea why you were fighting.
He says there's a fast gun in this town.
The first games that managed to tell much of a story had to sacrifice most of the gameplay and graphical features that video games were quickly becoming known for. These games are known as text-based games, and they include titles like 1971 The Oregon Trail, 1976 Colossal Cave Adventure, and 1979 The Wizard's Castle. At least in the 70s releases of these games, there were next to no pictures and the entire game was made up of reading and decision making. But what these games lacked in gameplay and graphics, they made up for in depth and lore, something that other games at the time didn't have at all. In Colossal Cave Adventure, you play as an adventurer, exploring a perilous cave in search of treasure. The game plays out similar to a tabletop adventure like Dungeons & Dragons. You use simple commands to explore the cave, collecting items and treasure as you're guided by a witty narrator who honestly couldn't care less if you made it out alive. RPGs bridge the gap between gameplay-focused games and text-based games. The Atari 2600 had a 1.19 MHz CPU and 128 bytes of RAM. This impressive combination meant it could handle both the graphics of an action game and all the lines of a text-based game, and even some audio. Dragon Stomper came out in 1982 for the Atari 2600. Dragon Stomper didn't exactly have a deep story like we might expect in modern RPGs, but it was loaded with theming. During the opening segment of the game, the player is stranded in the wilderness with no access to the town. You have the option to either find the identity card, which will provide you free access in and out of town, or alternatively, you could find enough gold to bribe the guard. Beyond that, the game is filled with castles, soldiers, barbarians, and even some fantasy creatures like slimes. In 1983, Nintendo released the Family Computer, or the NES as it was known in the West, and in '86, Enix came out with Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest was a huge leap compared to Dragon Stomper in terms of both graphics and gameplay, but not only that, it had a real story. In Dragon Quest, the player is given the task of rescuing Princess Gwaelin, daughter of King Lorik. She had been kidnapped by the evil Dragon Lord and imprisoned in the Swamp Cave. The story really gets interesting around the time the princess is rescued. After traveling the land of Alfgard, slaying monsters and gaining power, the hero discovers the Swamp Cave. And after defeating the Green Dragon that held her captive and returning Princess Gwaelin to her father, the hero still had one more task. When you confront the Dragon Lord in the ending portions of the game, you are presented with an option. You can join the Dragon Lord and rule half of the world with him, or you could defeat him and restore peace to Alfgard. If the player opts to fight the Dragon Lord, then after the battle he returns home, restoring peace to the land, marries Princess Gwaelin, and goes on a journey to find his own kingdom. A fitting and happy ending. But if the hero instead agrees to join the Dragon Lord, then the game turns an eerie red and freezes. You made the wrong choice, and now this is the only ending you get. Storytelling in video games has become an art form over the years, to a degree that some games, like Firewatch, abandon most conventional aspects of gameplay and focus almost entirely on story. It's an aspect that we almost all love about video games, but sometimes take for granted. And for many of us, it's the reason we play.